I, 34M, stood at the edge of my in-laws' sprawling backyard, watching Clara raise her champagne glass high above her head. The afternoon sun caught the bubbles rising through the golden liquid, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. The entire family had gathered for our annual reunion, 40-some relatives spread across the manicured lawn, all turning their attention to my sister-in-law as she prepared to make a toast. "To family," Clara began, her voice carrying across the yard with practiced ease. She had always been good at commanding attention. "To another year of blessings, growth, and success." Her eyes found mine across the crowd, and something in her expression shifted. A smile played at the corners of her mouth, but it wasn't warm. "And especially to Daniel, my dear brother-in-law, who has finally gotten his life right after all these years." The words hung in the air like a slap. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. I felt every pair of eyes in that backyard swivel toward me, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed amusement. But the loudest reaction came from Margaret, my mother-in-law, whose scoff was so pronounced it might as well have been amplified through a megaphone. "About time," Margaret muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. She didn't even try to hide her smirk. My wife Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. I could feel her tension, her embarrassment on my behalf. She knew what this was about. Everyone knew what this was about. My failed business, the bankruptcy, the 2 years of financial struggle that followed, the constant comparisons to her other brother Mark, the successful doctor with the perfect life. But what they didn't know was that my life wasn't the only one about to be transformed that day. I forced a smile, raised my own glass in acknowledgement, and took a sip of champagne that tasted like acid going down. The conversation gradually resumed around us, but I could still feel the weight of their judgment, their amusement at my expense. Clara had done this deliberately, publicly, in front of everyone who mattered. She had chosen her moment perfectly. "Don't let them get to you," Sarah whispered, but I could hear the hurt in her voice too. She had defended me countless times against her family's criticism, and it was wearing on her. The thing about public knowing your limitations. 3 years of Margaret openly wondering why Sarah hadn't married someone more stable, more successful, more like Mark. Mark, the golden child, who had just bought his 3rd investment property. Mark, whose medical practice was thriving. Mark, who never failed to mention his latest vacation or his new Tesla whenever we gathered for family dinners. Mark, who had the audacity to offer me a loan last Christmas, not privately, but in front of everyone, making sure the whole family knew he was in a position to bail out his struggling brother-in-law. I had refused the loan. Pride was all I had left at that point. But that was before everything changed, before the email that had arrived 6 days ago, sitting in my inbox like a ticking time bomb of possibility. Before I realized that this family reunion, this moment of humiliation, would be the last time any of them would look down on me. "Let's go inside for a bit," Sarah suggested, tugging on my hand. She wanted to get me away from the crowd, from the knowing looks and whispered comments, but I shook my head. "I'm fine," I said, louder than necessary. "It's a beautiful day. Let's enjoy it." The truth was, I needed to be here. I needed to see it all, to remember this feeling, to fuel what was coming next. Because Clara and Margaret had no idea what they had just set in motion. They had no idea that while they were busy celebrating my supposed recent improvement, I had been quietly building something that would eclipse anything Mark had achieved, anything any of them had imagined possible. The afternoon wore on with the typical reunion activities. The kids ran around playing tag, the men gathered around the grill discussing sports and stock markets, and the women clustered in small groups, sharing gossip and recipes. I moved through it all like a ghost, present but not really there, my mind on other things. "Daniel!" Mark's voice boomed across the yard. He was standing by the grill, beer in hand, surrounded by cousins and uncles. "Come over here. Tell everyone about your new job. My new job. That's what they thought had fixed my life. 6 months ago, I had taken a position at a marketing firm. A steady paycheck, benefits, the works. It was respectable. Safe. The kind of job that would never make me rich but would never embarrass is knowing you're making a real difference, you know? Saving lives, advancing medicine. That's what it's all about. He glanced at me then, just for a second, but I caught it. The subtle reminder that I was now just another corporate drone, pushing papers for a paycheck. Not changing the world, not making a difference, just surviving. Absolutely, I agreed, taking a long pull from my beer. Making a difference is what matters. The conversation drifted to other topics, but I found myself watching Clara and Margaret across the yard. They were sitting at one of the picnic tables, heads together, probably dissecting every detail of the reunion, every family scandal, every disappointment. Occasionally, one of them would glance my way, and I could practically read their thoughts. Poor Daniel. At least he's finally got a real job. Maybe now Sarah won't have to carry all the financial burden. They had no idea that I hadn't touched a penny of my marketing job salary in 6 months. Every dollar had gone straight into my other project, the one I had been developing in secret for the past 2 years. The one that had started as a desperate attempt to prove I wasn't a failure and had evolved into something extraordinary. It had begun simply enough. After my first startup failed, I had spent months analyzing what went wrong. The idea had been solid, but the execution was flawed. I had tried to do too much too fast, had taken on investors who pushed me in the wrong direction, had lost sight of the core innovation that had sparked the whole thing in the first place. So I had started over, quietly, without telling anyone. Not even Sarah knew the full extent of what I was building. She thought I was tinkering with code in my spare time, maybe building some apps for extra income. She had no idea I had assembled a remote team of developers from around the world, that I had been working 18-hour days, that I had maxed out credit cards and taken out personal loans to fund the development. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of behavior that had gotten me into trouble before. But this time was different. This time, I had learned from my mistakes. This time, I had built something remarkable. The product was a revolutionary AI-driven platform for supply chain optimization. It sounds boring, I know. It's not as sexy as social media or gaming or any of the other Ventana Capital, one of the biggest venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. They wanted to meet. They wanted to invest. They were talking numbers that made my head spin. Numbers that would not only validate everything I had built, but would launch the company into the stratosphere. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days after the reunion. 3 days until everything changed. But sitting there, watching Clara laugh at something Margaret said, watching Mark accept another round of congratulations for his latest achievement, I realized I didn't want to wait 3 days. I wanted them to know now. I wanted them to understand that while they had been busy mocking me, I had been building an empire. But not yet. The timing had to be perfect. As the sun began to set, the reunion moved into its final phase. This was tradition. As darkness fell, we would gather for dinner, and then there would be speeches. Every year, different family members would stand up and share their successes, their milestones, their proud moments. It was supposed to be celebratory, but it had always felt like a competition to me, a chance for the successful ones to remind everyone else of their place in the family hierarchy. Margaret stood up first, as the matriarch. She talked about the family legacy, about the importance of hard work and ambition. Her eyes found mine several times during the speech, each glance a little reminder of how I had fallen short of these ideals. Then Mark stood up. Of course he did. He talked about his practice, about a young patient whose life he had saved, about the responsibility that comes with success. It was moving, genuinely. Mark was a good doctor, a good man. His only flaw was that he had been born into a family that weaponized success, that used achievement as a cudgel to beat down those who struggled. Other relatives shared their moments. A cousin who had gotten promoted, an aunt whose daughter had gotten into Harvard, an uncle whose business had expanded to 3 new states. Each announcement was met with applause, with congratulations, with the warm glow of family approval. Then Clara stood up. I just want to say, she began, her voice slightly slurred from the champagne, How proud I am of this family. We've all worked so hard, achieved so much, and it's important to recognize that success isn't just about money or fame. Sometimes it's raising her glass again, the extraordinary and the ordinary alike, because every family needs both. She sat down to scattered, uncomfortable applause. Margaret was beaming at her daughter, clearly approving of the message. Mark had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. He never did. I stood up. The movement was so sudden that Sarah gasped. I hadn't planned this, not exactly, but something about Clara's speech, about the casual cruelty of it, the deliberate humiliation disguised as inclusion, had pushed me over the edge. "I'd like to say something," I announced. The family turned to me with expressions ranging from surprise to concern to barely concealed amusement. Poor Daniel, they were thinking. What could he possibly have to say? "First," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "I want to thank Clara for her toast earlier, and for this speech. It's always enlightening to know exactly where you stand with family." Clara's smile faltered slightly, sensing something in my tone. "She's right about one thing," I continued. "Not everyone can be a doctor like Mark. That takes a very specific kind of intelligence, dedication, and calling. Mark has all of those things, and we're all proud of him." Mark nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "And not everyone can build a successful business," I said, looking directly at Clara now. "I should know. I tried once and failed. Failed spectacularly, in fact. Lost everything. Had to start over from scratch. It was humiliating, devastating, all the things you've reminded me of for the past 3 years." The yard was completely silent now. Even the kids had stopped playing, sensing the tension in the adult gathering. "But here's the thing about failure," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "It teaches you things that success never can. It shows you who your real friends are. It reveals the true character of the people around you, and most importantly, it forces you to decide who you really are. Are you someone who gives up? Who accepts their limitations? Who settles for an ordinary life because that's what others expect of you?" I paused, looked around at all the faces watching me. Sarah's expression was a mixture of concern and confusion. She had no idea where this was going. Or paycheck. But that job, that paycheck, that safe, ordinary life you've all been so pleased to see me accept, that was just a cover. A way to fund what I was really building. I pulled out my phone, held it up so they could all see it, though they couldn't read the screen from where they were sitting. "This email," I said, "is from Ventana Capital. For those of you who don't know, they're one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. They manage about $12 billion in assets. They've funded some of the biggest tech companies in history, and they want to invest in my company." The silence was deafening. I could see Clara's mouth hanging slightly open, Margaret's face cycling through expressions of disbelief and suspicion. "The company I've been building in secret," I continued, "has developed a revolutionary platform for supply chain optimization. I won't bore you with the technical details, but our beta testing has shown cost reductions of 30 to 40% for major corporations. We have letters of intent from Fortune 500 companies. We have patents pending on our core technology, and Ventana Capital wants to lead our Series A funding round." I looked directly at Clara. "The initial valuation they're proposing is $120 million. Someone gasped. I think it might have been Sarah. "The funding round will give us $40 million in capital to scale the business," I continued, my voice calm and steady despite the chaos I could see brewing in the faces around me. "My equity stake, even after dilution, will be worth approximately $50 million, on paper at least. The real value will come when we go public in a few years, which, according to Ventana's projections, could value the company at over $1 billion. Mark's beer bottle slipped from his hand, shattering on the concrete patio. "But here's the part I think Clara and Margaret will find most interesting," I said, savoring every word. "Remember all those times you reminded me about my failed business? About the debt I accumulated? About how Sarah had to support us? Well, The signing bonus from this deal will not only clear every penny of that debt, but will also allow me to pay Sarah back for every dollar she spent supporting us during those hard years, with interest. I turned to my wife, whose eyes were filling with tears. I've already put an offer on a house, I told her, especially given the cost of the experimental treatment her doctor had recommended. The full amount. She won't have to worry about insurance or payment plans or any of it. Margaret's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, for once in her life rendered speechless. And Mark, I said, turning to my brother-in-law, I know you've been looking for investors for your new clinic, the one focused on providing free healthcare to underserved communities. I'd like to be your lead investor, not as a loan, but as a partner. Because you're right, making a difference is what matters. Mark stared at me, his expression completely unreadable. Now, I said, turning back to Clara, about those limitations you mentioned, about accepting who we are and being content with ordinary lives. You're absolutely right. Not everyone can build a successful business. Not everyone can turn failure into triumph. Not everyone can prove their doubters wrong in such spectacular fashion. Some people, Clara, are destined to stand on the sidelines, making snide comments and cruel toasts, contributing nothing but negativity and judgment. Some people are so small, so petty, that they can only feel big by making others feel small. Clara's face had turned red, whether from anger or embarrassment I couldn't tell. So thank you, I said, raising my beer bottle in her direction. Thank you for every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every public humiliation. Thank you for the motivation. Thank you for the anger that kept me working 18-hour days. Thank you for the determination you instilled in me to prove you wrong. Without your constant reminder of my failures, I might never have pushed hard enough to achieve this level of success. I looked around at all the stunned faces, at the family that had defined me by my lowest moment for 3 years. I want to be clear about something, I said, my voice softer now but still carrying across the silent yard. This isn't about money. It's not about being better than anyone else. It's about resilience. It's about refusing to let others define your worth. It's about getting back up when everyone expects you to stay down. I looked at the younger cousins, the teenagers and college students who had witnessed years of my humiliation at these gatherings. Let this be a lesson, I told them. Seeing the realization dawn on their faces that the family dynamic had just shifted irreversibly. The failure, the disappointment, the cautionary tale they had used to make themselves feel superior had just become the family's greatest success story. Sarah stood up beside me, her hand finding mine again, but this time not in comfort or support. This time in partnership, in celebration, in the kind of unity that comes from weathering storms together and emerging stronger on the other side. Is this real? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Every word, I whispered back. Margaret finally found her voice. How do we know this is legitimate? These Silicon Valley companies, they make big promises, but I pulled up the email on my phone, walked over to her, and showed her the screen. The Ventana Capital letterhead, the meeting details, the proposed terms. Her reading glasses came out, and she studied it with the intensity of someone looking for evidence of fraud. This meeting is in 3 days? She asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Yes, I said. And they've already transferred a good faith deposit to demonstrate their seriousness. $200,000, sitting in escrow. 200,000, she repeated faintly. Clara still hadn't said anything. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It wasn't quite defeat, wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite disbelief. It was the look of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. Clara, I said, addressing her directly, you asked earlier if I'd finally gotten my life right. The answer is no. My life was never wrong. It was just in progress. The difference between you and me is that I knew my story wasn't finished. You wrote my ending 3 years ago and have been trying to force me to accept it ever since. But that's the thing about other people's opinions. They only have power if you give it to them. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the concrete. "I need another drink," she muttered, heading toward the house. Margaret followed her, the two of them huddling together as they walked, probably trying to process what had just happened, trying to figure out how to spin this in a way that didn't make them look like the villains of the story. But they were the villains. They had chosen them. Looked at me with pity or disdain, were now eager to hear my thoughts on business, on technology, on success. Mark approached me near the end of the evening, when things were winding down and people were starting to leave. "Did you mean it?" he asked. "About investing in the clinic?" "Every word," I said. "It's a good project, Mark. Important. The kind of thing that actually makes a difference." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry. For all of it. I knew what they were doing, Clara and Mom. I should have said something." "You couldn't," I said, and I meant it. "They're your family. Your actual family. I'm just the in-law. It wasn't your fight." "It should have been," he insisted. "Sarah's my sister. You're her husband. That makes you family. Real family. I should have stood up for you." "You can make it up to me by building an amazing clinic," I said. "Deal?" "Deal," he said, shaking my hand. "And Daniel? Congratulations. Not just on the success, but on how you handled it. Lesser men would have been much crueler in your position." "The success is revenge enough," I said. But even as I said it, I knew there was one more thing I needed to do. One final twist of the knife, not out of cruelty but out of justice. As Sarah and I prepared to leave, I found Clara and Margaret in the kitchen, doing dishes in silence. They looked up when I entered, their expressions guarded. "I wanted to thank you both one more time," I said, "and to let you know that I've made a decision about the company headquarters." They exchanged glances, probably wondering why I was telling them this. "We're going to need significant space for our operations," I continued. "Office buildings, manufacturing facilities, distribution centers. It's going to bring hundreds of jobs to whatever community we choose, maybe thousands eventually." Margaret's eyes lit up with sudden interest. Her town had been struggling economically for years, desperately in need of major employers. "I had originally considered this area," I said, gesturing vaguely toward their community. "It would have been convenient, keeping the business close to home. The tax incentives the city is offering are attractive. The mayor has been very persistent in his courtship." I could see the hope blooming in Margaret, encouraged rather than dismissed. "A place where my employees won't have to encounter people who spent years telling their CEO he would never amount to anything." Clara's face flushed red. "You're doing this out of spite." "No," I said calmly. "I'm doing this out of wisdom. Why would I bring prosperity to a community that showed me nothing but contempt? Why would I create opportunities for people who celebrated my failures? Business is about making smart decisions, and keeping my company away from toxic influences is the smartest decision I can make. That's millions of dollars in economic impact you're taking away from our community," Margaret said, her voice hollow. "Yes," I agreed. "It is. The same millions you thought I'd never be capable of generating. The opportunity you never believed I could create. It's almost poetic, isn't it? Your lack of faith in me has cost your community exactly what you never thought I could provide." I turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and that house I mentioned buying? The Colonial on Riverside Drive? It's just 5 minutes from our new headquarters. Sarah and I will be moving next month. We'll be sure to send you a change of address card." The last thing I saw before leaving the kitchen was Clara sinking into a chair, the full weight of what had happened finally hitting her. She had spent 3 years making me feel small, worthless, insufficient. And in one evening, I had relegated her to a footnote in my success story, a minor obstacle overcome on the way to greatness. The drive home was quiet at first. Sarah was still processing everything, occasionally looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "How long have you been planning this?" she finally asked. "The company?" 2 years. The revelation at the reunion? About 6 days since I got the email. "And you never told me?" "I couldn't," I said, taking her hand. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed to be sure it was real first. I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing you again if it didn't work out. You've never disappointed me, she said firmly. Frustrated me? Yes. Worried me? Absolutely. But disappointed? Never. I married you because I saw your potential, even when you couldn't see it. Can't change what they did, but we can control how we frame it in our story. They were the resistance that made me stronger, the pressure that turned coal into diamond. Very poetic, she said. But I know you, Daniel. This isn't over for you, is it? I thought about it for a moment. She was right, of course. The success itself wasn't enough. The money, the validation, the complete reversal of fortune, all of it was satisfying, but there was something more I needed. I want them to understand, I said finally. Not just that I succeeded, but that their cruelty was wrong. That the way they treated me, the way they treat anyone they see as beneath them, is toxic and destructive. They'll never admit that, Sarah said. You know them. They'll find a way to spin this, to make themselves part of your success story. By next reunion, Clara will be telling people how her tough love motivated you to greatness. Let her, I said. Everyone who was there tonight knows the truth. They saw her face when I made the announcement. They heard the venom in her toasts. They know exactly what she is. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the evening settling around us like a warm blanket. Everything was about to change. The house, the lifestyle, the dynamics with her family, all of it. But the change felt right, earned, deserved. I have a confession, Sarah said as we pulled into our driveway. I knew something was going on. Not the specifics, but I knew you were working on something big. How? You talk in your sleep, she said with a smile. Code names, technical terms, occasionally numbers. And the late-night phone calls you thought I didn't hear. The packages you had delivered to your office instead of home. The way you'd get lost in thought with this intense look on your face. I knew you were building something. Why didn't you say anything? Because I also knew you needed to do this your way, on your terms. You needed to prove something to yourself, not just to them. If I had pushed, if I had insisted on being involved, it would have become our project instead of your redemption. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears to my eyes. She had weathered the storm with me, home for 3 difficult years. Tomorrow, we would start the process of moving forward, of building our new life on the foundation of this success. But tonight, we were still the same people who had struggled and survived together. Inside, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Ventana Capital email again, still hardly believing it was real. The meeting was in 3 days. 3 days to prepare the presentation that would secure our future. 3 days to finalize the details that would transform a secret project into a publicly valuable company. But there was one more email in my inbox, one that had arrived during the reunion. It was from Jonathan Chen, the partner at Ventana who had been championing our deal. Daniel, it read, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We've been doing our final due diligence and everything looks excellent. However, we discovered something interesting. One of your competitors has been trying to develop similar technology. They're about 18 months behind you, but they're well-funded and aggressive. The company is called Meridian Solutions. I'm attaching some information about them, including their leadership team. We should discuss strategies for maintaining your technological advantage when we meet. Best, Jonathan. I opened the attachment and nearly laughed out loud. There, listed as a senior advisor to Meridian Solutions, was Robert Clark, Clara's husband. The man who had sat silently through dinner while his wife humiliated me. The man who ran a consulting firm that specialized in helping companies optimize their operations, which is probably how he had learned about the potential in supply chain technology. But he was 18 months behind. 18 months might as well have been 18 years in the tech world. By the time his company brought a product to market, we would be the established leader, the industry standard, the Amazon of supply chain optimization. I thought about calling Clara, about letting her know that her husband was trying to compete in the same space I had already conquered. But then I decided against it. Let them find out naturally, organically, the way bad news always travels in families. Let Robert explain to his wife why his well-funded, professionally staffed company couldn't compete with the brother-in-law she had dismissed as a failure. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. I refined my presentation, gathered additional data, prepared and— "There," she said. "You've already won. You've built something amazing. Everything else is just details." The Ventana Capital offices were exactly what you'd expect from a Silicon Valley venture firm. Glass and steel and modern art, an atmosphere of barely contained energy and ambition. I was shown to a conference room where 5 partners were waiting, including Jonathan Chen, who greeted me with a warm handshake. "We're very excited about this opportunity," he said. "Your technology is exactly the kind of innovation we look for." The presentation went better than I could have imagined. Every question they asked, I had an answer for. Every concern they raised, I had already addressed. The beta testing data spoke for itself, but beyond the numbers, I could see they understood the vision. This wasn't just about optimizing supply chains. It was about revolutionizing how global commerce operated. "The scalability is what really impresses us," one of the partners said. "Most optimization platforms hit a ceiling, but your architecture actually performs better with more data, more complexity." That was the key insight, I explained, pulling up the technical architecture slides. Instead of trying to simplify the complexity, we embraced it. The AI doesn't just learn patterns, it learns how patterns interact, how disruptions cascade, how to predict problems before they occur. "And you built this with a team of how many?" another partner asked. 12 developers, working remotely from 6 different countries, I said. I kept the team small and agile. Everyone has equity stakes, so they're invested in our success. Jonathan leaned forward. "Let's talk about Meridian Solutions." There it was, the elephant in the room. "What about them?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "You know they're developing competing technology?" "I'm aware," I said. "I also know they're significantly behind us and taking a fundamentally different approach. They're trying to build a one-size-fits-all solution. We're building a platform that adapts to each client's specific needs." "Robert Clark is well-connected," Jonathan said. "He could make things difficult." I smiled. "Robert Clark is my brother-in-law's husband. I know exactly what he's capable of and what he's not. He's a good consultant, but he's never built anything from the ground up. He doesn't understand the technical challenges we've already— million in revenue in the first year just from these 3 clients. And the pipeline? 42 companies have expressed interest. My marketing experience helped here. I knew how to position the technology, how to speak their language. We're not selling them software. We're selling them competitive advantage." The meeting continued for 3 hours. We discussed everything from intellectual property protection to hiring plans to international expansion. By the end, I could see it in their faces. They were in. "We'd like to move forward," Jonathan said finally. "The terms we discussed in the email, 40 million Series A at a 120 million valuation. We'll want 2 board seats and standard protective provisions, but we're prepared to move quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. "We can have terms sheets ready by end of week. Close within 30 days if your legal team is prepared." "They're prepared," I assured him. We shook hands all around, and just like that, it was done. 3 years of struggle, 2 years of secret development, 6 days of anticipation, and 3 hours of presentation had culminated in this moment. I was now, officially, the CEO of a company valued at over $100 million. I called Sarah from the parking lot. "How did it go?" she asked, anxiety clear in her voice. "Pack your bags," I said. "We're going to Paris as new multimillionaires." She screamed, actually screamed with joy. I held the phone away from my ear, laughing. "Are you serious? They agreed to everything?" "Everything," I confirmed. 40 million in funding, valuation at 1 to 20. We're going to need to find a good lawyer to handle the paperwork. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much." "I love you too," I said. "And Sarah? Call your mother. Tell her we'll have the funds for her treatment transferred by end of month." There was silence on the line for a moment. That's really what you want to do? She asked. After everything? She's your mother, I said. And despite everything, she's family. But make sure she knows the money comes with one condition. What condition? She has to acknowledge, publicly, that she was wrong about me. Not to me. I don't need that. But to you. She needs to apologize to you for all the times she made you feel bad about your choice of husband. Interesting. I heard the news. Congratulations. We should talk about Robert's company. There might be synergies. Synergies. She wanted to find a way to piggyback on my success, to use my technology to advance her husband's competing platform. The audacity was almost admirable. I didn't respond. Margaret's message was longer, more complex. She congratulated us, thanked us for the offer of medical treatment funding, and then spent 3 paragraphs explaining how her criticism had always come from a place of love, how she had only wanted what was best for Sarah, how she had always believed I had potential but needed motivation. It was exactly what Sarah had predicted. They were already rewriting history, casting themselves as part of my success story rather than obstacles I had overcome. That evening, as Sarah and I sat on our porch looking at real estate listings on Riverside Drive, my phone rang. It was Robert Clark. "Daniel," he said when I answered. "Congratulations on the Ventana deal. That's quite an achievement." "Thank you, Robert," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. My company, Meridian, we're working on similar technology. Different approach, different market segment, but there might be opportunities for collaboration." "I don't think so," I said. "You haven't even heard my proposal." "I don't need to," I said. "Robert, you sat at that dinner table for 3 years while your wife humiliated me. You never once spoke up, never once suggested she might be out of line. You let it happen because you agreed with her assessment. I was a failure, and failures don't deserve respect or basic human decency. That's not. Now that I'm successful, you want to collaborate? Now that I have something you need, suddenly there are synergies? No, Robert. You and Clara made your position clear. I was beneath you when I was struggling. Stay beneath me now that I'm successful." "That's rather petty, don't you think?" "No," I said. "It's justice. Your company will fail, Robert. Not because I'll actively work against you, but because you're 18 months behind with inferior technology and a team that doesn't understand the problem space. When it does fail, remember this conversation. Remember that you had the opportunity to be connected to the industry." Wanted briefings. Potential clients wanted demonstrations. Through it all, I kept thinking about the reunion, about Clara's toast, about Margaret's scoff. They had given me the perfect moment to reveal everything, the perfect stage for my vindication. In trying to humiliate me one last time, they had set themselves up for the ultimate reversal. We closed on the house on Riverside Drive 3 weeks after the Ventana meeting. It was everything Sarah had dreamed of and more. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, the art studio she had always wanted, and that wraparound porch where we could sit and watch the sunset. The first night in our new home, we hosted a dinner party. Not for family, but for my team. The 12 developers who had believed in the vision and worked tirelessly to make it real. They flew in from around the world, finally meeting in person after 2 years of virtual collaboration. "This is just the beginning," I told them as we raised our glasses. "We're going to change how the world does business. We're going to solve problems that have plagued commerce for decades, and we're going to do it together." It was the toast I wished someone had made for me at that family reunion. A toast about potential, about possibility, about the future rather than the past. Margaret eventually agreed to my condition. Through tears, she apologized to Sarah for her years of criticism and doubt. She admitted she had been wrong about me, that her judgment had been clouded by superficial measures of success. It wasn't a particularly graceful apology, but it was sufficient. We transferred the funds for her treatment the next day. Clara, on the other hand, doubled down. She started telling family members that I had stolen the idea for my company from Robert, that the timing was suspicious, that there must be some explanation for my sudden success other than my own capability. It was sad, really, watching her try to maintain the narrative that I was somehow still inferior, still unworthy of respect. The truth came out eventually, as truth always does. Robert's company failed to secure funding after investors realized their technology was a poor imitation of ours. He had to shut down operations, laying off 30 employees and losing millions of investor dollars. Clara blamed me, of course, claiming I had sabotaged them somehow. You could it. Mark pulled me aside later that evening. I've been thinking about what you said at the reunion, he said, about failure teaching you things success never could. I think you're right. I've never really failed at anything, and sometimes I wonder if that's actually a weakness. It can be, I said. Success can make you complacent, make you think you have all the answers. Failure humbles you, forces you to question everything, to rebuild from first principles. Is that what you did? Rebuilt from first principles? In a way, I said. But more importantly, I rebuilt myself. The business was just the external manifestation of an internal transformation. Clara and your mother broke me down to nothing, and in that nothingness, I found out who I really was. And who are you? Mark asked. Someone who refuses to be defined by others' opinions, I said. Someone who transforms pain into power, criticism into motivation, doubt into determination. Your mother and sister tried to make me small. Instead, they made me unstoppable. A year later, our company went public. The IPO valued us at $1.3 billion. My stake, even after dilution, was worth over $400 million. We were on the cover of Tech Quarterly. The headline read, "From Failure to Fortune, How Daniel Morrison Built the Future of Supply Chain Management." They wanted to do a full profile, including family background. I declined to mention Clara or Margaret in the article. They didn't deserve even that acknowledgement. They had written themselves out of my success story through their own cruelty. Sarah and I established a foundation focused on helping failed entrepreneurs get back on their feet. We provided not just funding but mentorship, resources, and most importantly, belief in their ability to try again. Every month I would meet with these entrepreneurs, and I would tell them the same thing. Failure is not the end of your story. It's a chapter, perhaps a painful one, but just a chapter. The people who mock you now, who dismiss you, who treat your dreams as delusions, they're writing their own endings. They're choosing to be footnotes in someone else's success story rather than authors of their own. Don't let their limitations become yours. We named it the Second Chance and walked away. There was nothing left to say. Margaret died a year later. The treatment I had funded had given her 3 extra years of life, years she spent watching me rise to heights she had never imagined possible. I'd like to think that in her final moments, she understood the cost of her cruelty, the price of her mockery, but probably not. People like Margaret rarely change. They just become more entrenched in their own bitter narratives. Mark and I became close friends, united by our shared commitment to making a real difference. His clinic, funded by my investment, has treated over 10,000 patients who couldn't otherwise afford care. He named a wing after me, which I protested, but he insisted. "You taught me something important," he said at the dedication ceremony. "Success without compassion is just empty achievement. You could have crushed Clara and Mom completely, destroyed them. Instead, you just succeeded past them, made them irrelevant through your own growth rather than their destruction. That takes a bigger person than I might have been in your position. But the real victory, the truest success, wasn't the money or the recognition, or even the sweet satisfaction of proving my doubters wrong. It was the transformation of my own story from one of failure and humiliation to one of resilience and triumph. Every morning, I wake up in our beautiful house on Riverside Drive. I have coffee on the wraparound porch Sarah loves so much. I look out at the life we've built. the company that employs thousands, the foundation that helps hundreds, the family we've started with our 2 children who will never know the poverty and struggle we endured. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think about that family reunion. I think about Clara raising her glass, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she toasted my finally getting my life right. I think about Margaret's scoff, so loud and dismissive. I think about how small they tried to make me feel, how certain they were that I would never amount to anything. They were so confident in their cruelty, so secure in their superiority. They thought they were putting me in my place, establishing the family hierarchy once and for all. They thought they were writing the final chapter of my story. They were wrong. What they were actually doing was lighting a fire that would consume their whole world view. They were providing the catalyst for limitations and instead showed me I was limitless. In the end, the sister-in-law's betrayal became the foundation of my triumph. The family reunion that was meant to cement my position as the family failure became the stage for revealing myself as the family's greatest success. And the revenge? The revenge was not in their destruction but in my elevation, not in their poverty but in my prosperity, not in their humiliation but in their irrelevance. Because the ultimate revenge against those who try to make you small is to become so big they can't even see the top of what you've built. The ultimate response to those who mock your failures is to succeed so spectacularly that your failures become part of an inspiring origin story rather than a cautionary tale. Sarah asked me once if I forgave them. No, I said. Forgiveness would suggest that what they did was forgivable. It wasn't. They were cruel, deliberately and repeatedly to someone who was vulnerable and struggling. That's not forgivable. Then how do you move past it? By moving above it, I said. They exist in a small, petty world where success is measured in comparison to others' failures. I've built a world where success is measured by impact, by innovation, by the number of people I can lift up rather than tear down. They're not forgiven, but they're also not relevant. They're just noise in the background of a much bigger, more important story. And that's the truth of it. Clara and Margaret thought they were important characters in my story, thought they were the ones with power, with control, with the ability to define my worth. But they were wrong. They were never main characters. They were barely supporting cast. They were, at best, the initial obstacles that had to be overcome, the early challenges that made the eventual victory sweeter. My story was never about them. It was about me, about Sarah, about resilience and determination and the absolute refusal to accept other people's limitations as my own. The family reunion where Clara gave her cruel toast was 5 years ago now. 5 years that took me from bankruptcy to billions, from humiliation to honor, from the bottom of the family hierarchy to so far above it that the hierarchy itself became meaningless. Sometimes young entrepreneurs ask me for advice, wanting to know the secret to building a billion-dollar company. I tell them the truth. There is no secret. There's only work and will. Sarah went, and she told me about it afterward. Clara asked about you, she said. Wanted to know if you were ever going to forgive her. What did you tell her? The truth, Sarah said. That forgiveness isn't owed, it's earned, and she's done nothing to earn it. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. She cried, said everyone makes mistakes, that family should stick together. Family, I said, the word bitter in my mouth. She should have thought about family when she was publicly humiliating me. She should have thought about family when she was making you cry with her constant criticism. That's what I told her, Sarah said. And then I left. There was nothing more to say. And there isn't. This story, this journey from humiliation to triumph, from bankruptcy to billions, is complete. Clara and Margaret served their purpose in my narrative. They were the catalyst for change, the motivation for success, the darkness that made the light shine brighter. But they were never the point. The point was the transformation. The point was proving that no one else gets to write your ending. The point was showing that revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, but about building yourself into someone they could never have imagined. I am Daniel Morrison. Once bankrupt, now billionaire. Once mocked, now respected. Once the family failure, now the family legend. And it all started with a cruel toast at a family reunion. a sister-in-law who thought she could define my worth, and a mother-in-law whose scoff became the soundtrack to my success. They thought they were putting me in my place. Instead, they launched me into the stratosphere. And from up here, they look exactly as small as they always were. Epilogue. 10 years later. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by courier to my office at the top of the Morrison Building, our new corporate headquarters. The return address made me pause. Clara Williams. She had gone back to her maiden name after the divorce. Inside was a handwritten note, the script shaky, uncertain. Daniel, I know I have no right to contact you. I know you have no reason to read this, but I need you to know something. I was wrong. Not just mistaken or misguided, wrong, cruel, destructive. I've spent years blaming you for Robert's failure, for my divorce, for meeting, saw the envelope and raised an eyebrow. Clara, I said simply. What does she want? Nothing. Just to apologize. After 10 years? Better late than never, I suppose. Are you going to respond? I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain the silence that had stretched between us for a decade. But another part, the part that had built a foundation on second chances, that believed in redemption even when it seemed impossible, wondered if this was a moment for something different. Maybe, I said. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but maybe acknowledgement. Maybe just letting her know the apology was received. Sarah nodded. You're a better person than I would be. No, I said. I'm just someone who learned that holding on to anger is like holding on to a hot coal. Eventually, you're the one who gets burned. I never did respond to Clara's letter, but I kept it, filed away with other documents from that period of my life. Not as a trophy or a reminder of victory, but as evidence of transformation, hers and mine. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not revenge or success or even vindication. It's about transformation. It's about refusing to let others' cruelty define your capacity. It's about building something beautiful from the ashes of humiliation. The family reunion that started it all feels like a lifetime ago now. The person I was then, standing in that backyard, absorbing Clara's cruel toast and Margaret's dismissive scoff, feels like a stranger. That person was broken, desperate, clinging to dignity by his fingernails. But that person was also on the verge of transformation. He just didn't know it yet. Now I do. Now I understand that every cruel word, every public humiliation, every moment of despair was actually a gift. Not because cruelty is good or suffering is noble, but because those experiences revealed who I really was when everything else was stripped away. And who I was, who I am, is someone who refuses to stay down. Someone who transforms pain into power. Someone who builds empires from the rubble of failure. Clara thought she was ending my story with that toast. Instead, she was beginning it. And what a story it turned out to be.